I am an art historian, but today what I'm talking about more is about history rather than art. Because we are in Florence, and we are surrounded, Italy, first of all, is the country that has the most artworks in the world. And the city with the most artworks in the world is Florence. It has 1 million artworks on public display and 1 million in deposits. So one of the questions that has always bothered me is why Florence? Okay, why here? What was it that made this city the centre of the Renaissance? And there are lots of books that say, oh, it was the revival of the antique. Well, that's very boring. They revived the antique in Sicily, and they revived the antique in Rome, and they revived the antique in Pisa. So we must be able to do better than this. So I addressed exactly that question. So the plague came down the Silk Road, and it reached Caffa, where the Genoese were fighting to keep a port on the Black Sea. And the Genoese ship became infected, and the plague came on into Italy and into Europe, and it swept Europe. And if you can imagine how dreadful this was, within 15 months, 70% of the city disappeared, and it would no longer fill the city walls. And obviously it gave people this feeling that this was the end of the world. Was this the apocalypse? Was this what was written about, the end of the world? Death was amongst us. Was God punishing us for what, our sins? Why was the plague devastating Europe and everywhere you went, and particularly this city? One of the things that happened was that particularly in Spain, the papacy in Spain was under Benedict XIII. And Benedict XIII began to preach that one of the reasons that, God was angry was we had not converted the Jews. So as a reaction, there were people who felt that the Jews had brought this disease. There were people who felt that their lack of faith in Christianity had brought God's punishment. But they began to attack the Jews in Cordoba, in Seville, and all over Spain. Suddenly, in 1391, the crowds began to attack the Catalan cities, the great trading cities of Catalonia and Valencia. And in 1391, they attacked the Jewish community in Barcelona. A lot of the Jews who were better off and who were frightened of living in this terrible situation of fear with this rising, rabid, fanatical Catholicism around them. So they left. And into Florence, you have coming these rich, highly expert, mercantile Jews who knew the languages of the Mediterranean, they knew the weights and measures of the Mediterranean, they knew how to deal with cargo, they knew where to take it to sell. And so you have these Jews coming in with banking expertise, and this is very important. Now, let's talk about Florence. One of the great things that had happened was that Florence was able to develop as a small republic. And it was very much looked towards the model of Venice, and also Ragusa, which is now called Dubrovnik. And Florence saw these models of republics, and they saw it as a superior form of government, they saw it as a more humane form of government, and a republic had developed in Florence. The Duke of Athens was invited to come to Florence when there was a sort of economic crisis to sort out the city. And he was eventually expelled because they didn't want to have a tyrant or a leader. They actually wanted to continue to keep their republic. But the great thing that the Duke of Athens did before he was booted out was that he allowed the guilds to form, which were the groups of different artisans. So there would be, you know, the wool merchants, the silk merchants, the glass, and so on. They were finally allowed to control their merchandise, their conditions, their apprenticeships. Florence was particularly interesting because it abolished all the anti-Jewish laws. They had abolished them in Florence. And if you came to Florence as a citizen, just as if it was the Republic of Rome, you had the same rights as anyone else. You had the same rights to justice, you had the same rights of not being overtaxed, and so on. So here I should also talk a little bit about the banks. Now, most of the banking families of Florence had collapsed in the plague. But the one banking family that decided to set up new banks was the Medici. And first of all, they gave their protection and support to these incoming Jewish specialists who really knew what they were doing in the European trade market. But secondly, they set up a new form of banking. The Medici decided to have partners. So if they set up a bank, for example, in London, they would take a local person or someone they sent from Florence who would put their investment of like a third of the money in that bank, and 2/3 would be Medici. And so they had more flexibility and they had more security, but it also meant the bank manager of that bank was really invested in the bank because they didn't want it to fail because their money was in it. And the Florentines begin to issue the florin. In this period, the Republic did two things. One, in 1420, it opened the building site to build the Duomo. So you had a permanent building campaign going on, which gave economic riches to the people of Florence. Venice and Florence were fighting for people because it was so depopulated. So one of the things they could do was that to bring people into the city was to have a permanent building campaign. One of the great things about Brunelleschi's building project is that, of course, it's trying to balance the baptistry in front of it. The baptistry is 8-sided, and they build this dome, the Duomo, which also has that octagonal shape. It's trying to repeat the balance of this incredibly important building of the baptistry. What he did was exactly the same solution as in the baptistry, which was to have a double dome, which means you can build it supporting the outer shell with the inner shell. So that is what was going on. There's this rebuilding, this building program, which was not only the Duomo, but it was also San Marco, it was also the Hospital di Vicente. The Republic had this huge building program. And the second campaign they had was a permanent wall, which actually, you know, they had, the Florentines were permanently at war from 1402 to continuously, because with the weakening of Lucca and Siena and the towns round them, they saw their opportunity to grab these towns. And they took Lucca, they took Siena, and they took Pisa, and then they bought the rights to the port of Pisa and Leghorn. That's Livorno. And with those rights to the port, they began to have entrance into the sea trade that now had this vacuum of the Catalan, you know, collapse. And if you think of the Piazza Vecchia, the main hall of the Republic, the paintings, it is absolutely stuffed with paintings of war, because that is what they were doing continually to expand their territory and protect their expanding mercantile rights. There's the orphanage. Now, obviously, one of the things that happens after the plague is this need for people, and the need for babies, the need to replace the population. The population of Tuscany was devastated. There was nobody to milk the cows. There was nobody to grow crops. They were desperately trying to bring people back into the countryside. And so if you had orphans, they were incredibly treasured because you needed this population, you needed these children. And it's a period of time when the most number of artwork of any subject is a mother and child. Okay, now let's talk about trade. Once they managed to, the Florentines managed to buy the rights to the port in Pisa, they built these two ships, which were actually called cogs. And they were very, very good for carrying an enormous amount of merchandise. And they had 6 small warships that went along with them to protect them. The Florentine economy was based on, first, the wool trade, which everyone talks about, but the real secret to the Florentine trade was that they then also developed the silk market, and they wove incredible silks. And one of the ways that they bypassed the Venetians and the Genoese was they took mules across from Florence over to Ancona, and they took the mules over to the borders of the Black Sea, where they would exchange, they would barter the woolen cloth for raw silk. And they would then bring this raw silk back, weave it into the most incredible luxury silk goods, and sell it back to the sublime port that's to the Islam, to the Ottomans. Now, the reason why this has been very invisibilized in history is the popes continually told people not to trade with Islam because it was an ever-growing war between Christianity and Islam. So the Florentines, you always talk about the Florentine wool market, but the real wealth came from the silk. And if you look at the details of the wealth of the Medici, their profits on their accounts, they did indeed invest in the wool trade in Florence because he employed an enormous number of people, and he kept the people of Florence busy and happy, but they made most of their profits from a very small number of incredibly highly skilled weavers who wove to the models sent from the Ottomans these incredible silks and these incredible velvets.